All right, I guess I'll post a story or two if that's fine. This one obviously isn't mine, but is a retelling of the Pensacola sea serpent encounter. I'm going to do it in green text, because I like green text. March 24th, 1962, Pensacola, Florida. 5 teens want to go freediving off the wreck of the USS Massachusetts. The 5 teens, all male, are Eric, 16, Warren, 17, Larry, 15, Brad, 14, and finally, Edward McCleary, 16, who is the one recounting the story. The USS Massachusetts is about 2 miles off the coast, on a sandbar. Because of this, part of the wreck can be seen sticking out of the water. They grab a raft, change into their bathing suits, spot the part of the wreck sticking out of the water, and start paddling towards it. The water is extraordinarily cold. On their way to the ship, a storm starts coming in. They decide to paddle back to shore, but they instead get washed out to sea. They tried to wave down a boat for help, but the boater was apparently retarded and just waved back. They instead decide to tie onto a nearby buoy and wait out the storm. Their boat capsizes, but they manage to flip it over and climb back on. They wait out the storm. The sea finally becomes calm. Everything goes completely silent, and a heavy fog rolls in. They all sit there and make small talk for a bit, waiting for the fog to disperse so they can paddle back. The water around them becomes much warmer. Larry hears something in the distance and tells everyone to shut up and listen. Suddenly, the smell of dead fish hits them, and they hear a massive splash. The waves from this splash were big enough to break over the side of their raft. Through the fog, they see something that looked like a 10-foot-tall telephone pole emerge from the water, straighten up, pause for a moment, then arch and dive back underwater. They all get confused, especially being that they didn't even properly see the thing due to the fog. McCleary jokes that it was a sea monster. Why would you say that .png? They start hearing a high-pitched hiss, which sounds like it is getting closer and closer with each succession. They all understandably panic. They decide to put on their diving fins and jump into the water. This part sounds a bit odd, being that it seems like no sane human would jump into the water with a supposed sea monster. McCleary later justified this, claiming they were all terror-stricken and feeling the need to escape, decided to leave the tiny raft. McCleary tells everyone to swim for the wreck of the USS Massachusetts. Behind them, they hear more splashing and that weird hissing sound. The fog starts to clear up, but the water starts to get colder, rougher, and night starts to fall. Every once in a while, Eric would call back to make sure everyone was fine. Eventually, they hear a scream, lasting about 30 seconds from behind them. They hear Warren call out, help me, it's got Brad, I've got to get out of here." Warren's voice was suddenly cut off by his own screams. Everything goes silent. They can't find Warren and Brad. Not able to do anything, the 3 remaining boys continue swimming. After a while, McCleary looks around and realizes he can't see Larry. They dive down, trying to search for him underwater. They can't find him. They decide to keep on swimming. Eric starts sinking due to cramps, so McCleary grabs onto him and they swim together. It's the dead of night now, and everything is pitch black. Nearby lightning lights up the area, and they find that they are pretty close to the USS Massachusetts. A giant wave separates the two, but both keep swimming for the ship. As lightning lights up the area once again, McCleary sees the telephone pole-like figure break the water, open its mouth, and dive on top of Eric, dragging him down into the sea. McCleary describes the creature as having a neck that was about 12 feet long, brownish-green, and smooth-looking. The head of the creature looked like that of a sea turtle, only elongated and with the fuckton of small, sharp teeth. He did not see any fins on the creature's sides, but claimed that he saw a dorsal fin on its back as it was diving. The eyes looked green with oval pupils. McCleary pulls himself onto the wreck of the ship and stays there for a while. There is no sign of Eric. He eventually works up the courage to get back into the water and swim the 2 miles to shore. He claims that he did not remember swimming back to the shore, but instead imagined himself peacefully sinking to the bottom of the sea and laying on the soft sand. Interestingly enough, this sort of blissful peace is also reported by surviving drowning victims. Eventually, he finds himself back on the beach. He finds the strength to pull himself out of the surf. He finds a nearby tower that he climbs into and falls asleep in. He sleeps for a while, hearing strange voices in his head throughout the entire night. He wakes up, falls out of the tower, and some kids find him face down on the beach. He gets sent to a nearby hospital. Hospital claimed he was suffering from shock and exposure. The director of a search and rescue team comes in to talk to McCleary. McCleary tells him the story, of which the director surprisingly believes. A news crew also interview McCleary, but decides not to run a story about the sea monster. According to Coast Guard reports, McCleary swam for over 5 miles and was in the water for nearly 12 hours. Interestingly, the news article altered this fact, claiming that McCleary only swam 2 miles. I have no idea why they would fabricate something this mundane. A body washes ashore a couple days later. It's the body of Brad. Autopsy report claims that Brad drowned. That's the end. To my knowledge, they never found the bodies of the other kids. Oddly enough, there have been reports of similar-looking sea monsters off Mobile, Alabama, which is only 58 miles away. It's a pretty interesting story, and is convincing enough in some ways to make me think that McCleary either saw or thinks he saw a sea monster.
Nothing amazing, but likely truer than the rest of the shit here. Land nav training in northern Florida, camp landing or something. Pitch black, groups of 4 together. Cadre driving on dirt paths on ATVs everywhere to check on us. Crickets and frogs chirping. Night birds doing their usual night calls. Gets unusually louder. Gets so loud it starts to hurt. My buddies notice it too. Chirping goes for like 3 minutes, seems forever. We can barely talk to each other. Goes dead quiet in a snap. It's a relief, so we're more content than concerned. 5 minutes go by, we find a land nav point. We notice it's still dead quiet. Buddy mentions it usually means a predator is around. We don't give a shit. We have red lens flashlights and rubber ducks, training M16s. Another buddy asks, "Do you hear that?" Low grumbling rolling R sound. Notice we've heard it since the chirping stopped. Sounds like it's in our head and at different points around us simultaneously. Camp landing is in the middle of fucking nowhere. No machinery or buildings near the land nav point. We get concerned, not sure whether to continue on or go back to the SP, starting point. Talking back and forth for a few seconds, we then hear a bullhorn blast 3 times. Cadre announce over loudspeakers for all cadets to return to the SP immediately. Double time it. We didn't give a shit and felt badass with our fake M16s, so we just half-assed jogged back. Along the way, flocks of birds are taking off in a panic all around us. Start to get concerned, so we start picking up the pace. After about 10 minutes of jogging, we see the floodlights of the SP and multiple high-powered flashlights zooming around the SP. The entire time, the cadre were frantically ordering all cadets back to the SP. Each call more frantic than before, and increasing in frequency. We arrive, almost all lights on us. We're blinded and can't see. Here, that's them? Just 4. Right? It's just 4? Count them. Should be 4. I don't see another. I don't see another. Seriously concerned now. Rumbling sound behind us in the woods. Cadre tells us we're the last to arrive. Do a quick head count. We get in cattle trucks, newer deuce and a half. We take the fuck off. We left everything, including floodlights, tents, tables, vans, etc. at the SP. We drive back to the Hardball, main road, and continue at a fast pace to the staging area. Staging area has floodlights. We have to run guard shifts with stupid rubber ducks and a radio. Cadre doesn't fall asleep, stays awake till sunrise. Once sunrise hits, we go back to the SP to get our equipment messes. Everything knocked out, tents flattened, a wooden table collapsed, maps in crumpled messes. We pack up quick per orders and start heading to the main part of post. Entire time cadets are anxious as fuck because we had no idea what was going on. Everything was a frantic mess. Cadre seemed just as confused and nervous. As we're getting ready to head back south, the BC tells us we had to leave so fast because of an incoming thunderstorm. It was cloudy but no signs of rain, and it never did rain. I got scared shitless when I heard other cadets talking about a rumbling noise in the woods all around them and in some cases, in their head. Kinda a lackluster story. but it was just fucking weird, especially with the sound and how panicky all the cadre were acting.
Fuck this eclipse shit, I'm tired of it. Let's get a proper /x/thread going. Post creepy, weird, and unexplainable stuff that happened to you or others close to you, but had no reoccurrence and never bothered you again. Can be green text or not. I'll start. Be Euro on work trip to Florida. Stay at resort with coworker for 3 days. Last night before checkout, getting drunk at bar. Coworker comes down to the bar, looks pale as fuck. Says he saw ghost in his room. Clown on him. Agree to swap rooms for the lulz. Switch rooms, go to bed, and a few hours later, wake up to noises in bathroom. Investigate the bathroom, find nothing. Return to the room, see shadow figure sitting by my bedside. Stand there in disbelief. Blink a few times and it vanishes. It all happened so fast, but I know what I saw. I'm fucking terrified. It's almost 5 a.m., so I just stay awake, sitting in the armchair looking at the bed for what seemed like an endless amount of time. Eventually, it's time to get up, take a shower, and go grab breakfast and pack up. Coworker and I never talk about this again. A few days later, I did some research, and it turns out we stayed at a haunted resort called Casa Monica. There have been many reports of hauntings there, especially on room 401 and 511. That night, I slept in room 410. Fuck that place and fuck Florida. Can't even sleep without getting harassed by shadows and shit.
It has been many years since I have told anyone about my experience. I normally keep it to myself, as anyone I tell it to thinks I am crazy. I don't blame them either. If someone told me this story, I would think they were a lunatic. Be me. Just got out of high school, wanted to do something fun. I decide that I'll kayak through the Florida Everglades by myself. My mom hates the idea. My dad thinks I'll be fine. I had been camping, backpacking, and kayaking for about 7 years then, so I was fairly experienced in bushcraft. Ergo, like my dad, I thought I would be fine. Boy, was I wrong. As a precaution, my dad gives me my great-grandfather's old groundhog hunting rifle. MFW, my great-grandfather's groundhog rifle, is a M1903 Springfield. Regardless, I grab my shit and rush off into the unknown. I decided to kayak around the Thousand Island portion of the Everglades. I pushed off at a small island known as Chokoloskee, and I made my way into the wild. I was ecstatic. Finally, I get to enjoy my favorite hobby with no one around to bother me. I camp at a small, dinky campground known as Mormon Key. Pick-related. It was a 10-plus mile kayaking trip to get there, plus part of that was just navigated through the mangroves. Needless to say, I was tired as fuck. Make camp, cook dinner, watch the sunset, and go to sleep. I wake up to howling in the distance. Sounds like a wolf. Problem is, wolves have been extinct in the Everglades since like 1910. Kinda weirded out, but there is a body of water between me and the howling, so I don't really dwell on it. I wake up, make up a quick breakfast, and continue heading south on my kayak. End up going down the Lostman's River. See red circle and pick. Find a place down the river to camp. Set up camp, eat, and sleep. That would be my last comfortable night of sleep for the rest of the trip, and maybe the rest of my life. Wake up the next day refreshed and head further down the river. Eventually hit the mainland. See blue circle on pic. I walk about 1.5 miles east before I decide to turn back. That was a mistake. I tripped, fell, hit my head, and knocked myself out. Fuck me. I wake up about 2 hours later. I pick myself up, orient myself, and start heading back towards the kayak. I get to where the kayak was, and it was gone. The rope is still tied to a mangrove, but the middle is chewed through. It finally hits me. The kayak is fucking gone. My tent, most of my food, water, other gear, and most importantly, my transportation is gone. I decide to get to dry land, as I don't want to be in the mangroves at night. I get to dry land, eat a granola bar, and decide to head northeast in the morning to try and get help. I fall asleep with my head on my pack and next to a fire. I wake up only 4 hours later to the noise of howling, wolf howling. Once again baffled, seeing as they should be extinct around here. I shine my light into the brush. I see an absolutely gargantuan wolf, bigger than I've ever seen, think the size of a rhinoceros. I flip the fuck out and add what little dry wood I have to the fire. I spend the night clutching my rifle next to a dying fire. They eventually fuck off, but I don't let down my guard. Around sunrise, I immediately head northeast. I'm tired, hungry, thirsty, and just want to get help. I'm slowing, trudging through knee-high water. I consider ditching the rifle to get rid of weight, but then I remember those wolves. I keep going on, mindlessly, checking every 10 or so minutes to make sure I am on course. In the middle of these mangroves is a small dry area. I figure that I could rest here for a short while. I walk into the clearing and I see a structure. It's a pyramid. In the fucking Everglades. Think pick-related but smaller. I am dumbfounded at what a pyramid would be doing this far out here. I didn't think that the local tribes ever got this advanced. I needed to keep moving, but I just found a hidden pyramid in the middle of the Everglades. Archaeologists and historians would kill to find this. I figure I need to stop and at least look at the place. I climb up to the top, and there is a pit. Just a dark pit. Out of the pit I can hear something faint. I get down on all fours so I can hear it better. I realize that there is wailing coming from the pit. Grateful, painful, wailing. I promptly get up and try to get the fuck out of there. In a rush, I trip. See a pattern? After tripping, the wailing turns to straight up screaming. It sounds like a fucking banshee. I am convinced that anyone within 10 miles could have heard that shit. It was deafening. I started hurrying back down when I see those damn dogs. There was a pack of 5 of them, all completely fucking huge. I drop my pack and climb up a cypress tree. I fire all 5 of my rounds into the biggest fucker there. He bleeds out under the tree, while the screaming from the pyramid is just getting louder and louder. The pack drags away the dead dog into the mangroves. I take my opportunity, jump down, and start booking it northeast. I left my pack to save weight, and am going through the mangroves as fast as I possibly can. I even throw aside the rifle, as I have no ammo for it, and it is just dead weight. Eventually, after an hour, I can't hear the screaming anymore. I'm dehydrated as fuck and hungry, but I keep moving forward. I find myself on a loop road scenic drive with a bunch of police cars. They hesitate when they see me because I look like I've been through hell and back. They get me water and a granola bar and tell me to sit tight for an ambulance. When I ask how they knew to find me, they said some guy on the road called in about hearing incessant shooting a couple hours prior, and they had been searching since. I get to the hospital and the police interrogate me. I hesitate and tell them that I got lost and fired those shots at an alligator. They accept it and leave me alone. My family comes up in hysterics to see me. I confide in my dad about what actually happened. Naturally, he doesn't believe me and said that the dehydration must have made me hallucinate it. I go home and keep bringing it up. Eventually, he has me admitted to a psychiatrist for delusions and hallucinations. Gee, thanks, Dad. I've brought the story up to 2 different people, and both had the same response. I'm never going back to that place again, and I just want to forget about this. But I felt like I needed to tell someone. I don't care if you believe me or not, as no one else does. I just needed to get it out. I don't know what I found out there, and it will probably stay that way. Good night/X/ I'm going to bed.
Florida Anon here. Full-time guide by trade. I work backwoods, swamps, pine scrub forests, freshwater and saltwater for trophy game hunting and fishing. Specifically work untouched and unpressured areas. Have seen and experienced a lot of weird and terrifying things over the years and heard more than a few stories from other guides. As you can tell, I can't green text, so I won't even try. Kick back, grab a snack, and get ready for a fucking wall of text. Old heads in the outdoors industries around here don't like people talking about things that happen for fear of scaring off business and tourists that they depend on for a living. Didn't fully understand until recently just how far up the ladder that suppression of information goes. The state of Florida, FWC, and other land management/outdoor-oriented entities are, and have been for decades, pushing things under the rug so as not to reduce Florida outdoors tourism. Due to this, I feel like it's time someone started telling people about some of the things going on down here. I could give a shit if you believe me or not. A lot of what I have to tell are my own stories, and I'll share them as well as I can remember them, but it's hard to describe things that not only don't make logical sense and happened quickly during what were, at the time, extremely terrifying moments. The other stories will be secondhand accounts from other guides that want to get their stories out. A lot of these stories came out after copious amounts of alcohol, so I'll fill in the gaps as best I can so that they will make sense to the general public. First off, I doubt many people outside of people in the outdoor guiding communities of Florida have ever heard of them, but the Drass are some ass-puckeringly terrifying primordial entities that have been around since the first recorded history of people that made their way into Florida. Best way I can describe them is as nature guardians. From what I've learned, there are a bunch of them, and they all have their own territories that they protect. They're all unique in their own ways, not just in how they look, but also how they act and respond to people in their territory. They also have their own ways being appeased and their own sets of rules. The general idea of keeping them happy and respecting the nature in their territories is a good way to keep them away from you. There's the amalgamation that looks like a giant lump of dead animals all smashed together in a moving pile. I'm pretty sure that one's sole goal is to scare away anyone that makes its way into its territory, because if the giant mass of moaning and screeching flesh doesn't send you running away with bricks dropping out of your pant legs, then the smell will definitely drive you off. Next, and my personal favorite, is the raccoonipede. It's been known to have a relatively small territory compared to the other Drass I've heard about, but this fucker is a whole different kind of terrifying. Take 20 to 30 raccoons and lop one in half. Now lop the heads and tails off the rest. Take your pucker-inducing parts and stitch them all together with the front half of your first raccoon at the front and its ass at the caboose. Now you have a raccoon-pede. Now take said furry abomination and make it deathly silent. You can imagine the fear and panic it causes when someone looks up into a tree that they were looking at seconds earlier and sees this fucker peeking back at them. Luckily, this one is relatively harmless and is well known for accepting gifts in the form of food and parts of game taken in the area. I can always talk about more, but that's up to you guys. The last one I'll cover is the broken Drass. This one specifically stalks a certain river system in the central Florida area. It's fucked up. No one can really pinpoint what made it the way it is, but us guides blame it on people encroaching on the river system and destroying/building out the forest surrounding the river. None of the other Drass are purposefully malicious. This fucker wants nothing more than terror, fear, and harm for the hell of it. It's the only Drass I've ever had a direct encounter with, and this thing is fucked. Honestly, my encounter with that thing is a story in its own right. Let me know if you want to hear more, and I'll gladly share. At this point, I just want to get as much out as possible so that people really know what's going on down here. Well, I guess I'll keep telling you guys about the Drass that I've had an encounter with. First-hand information first to give you guys a good feel for them before I try and tell you other people's stories. This particular Drass likes to roam a portion of what's called the Econlockhatchee River system. It's a tributary of the St. Johns River and runs through the heart of central Florida. It's said that all the development on its land has pushed it back farther into the river system, and that may be why it's so fucked up, but honestly, who knows? We don't understand much about these things, and this one really doesn't give a shit about us. I was making my way through the river system, scouting potential fishing spots for a client that was looking to bag some big trophy fish in untouched waters when I had my encounter with it. I'll never forget the smell. That was the first thing I noticed. It was the smell of swamp rot, stagnant water, and decay. Much like the smell you get when you step into an untouched mud puddle in the middle of a swamp. I was making my way through some game trails in relatively high and dry grounds, near what I knew to be a productive fishing area when I got hit with that smell. The fact that it was so out of place for that area made my hair stand on end, and an immediate feeling of wrongness washed over me. I've seen and dealt with more than my fair share of hostile animals and people in the wilderness, and have learned how to keep my cool, even when I feel like I'm about to die. This feeling flushed all that right down the drain. I immediately broke one of the most important rules in outdoors guiding. I blindly hauled ass into the brush like a scared kid.
I remember almost immediately losing track of where I was and almost any sense of direction, despite knowing this whole area like the back of my hand. It was like the entire forest had turned against me.
Every time I slowed down, the smell would get stronger, almost like it was following me, and if I slowed down, it would try to overtake me. It was enough to keep me running until I felt like my lungs were about to burst. No matter what I did, said, or tried to do, the damn forest kept getting more and more unfamiliar until I was forced to stop and try to survey my surroundings. I almost shit a full brick wall in my pants when I saw that I had stopped not a few dozen feet from where I had initially been hit with the smell. I was running in fucking circles. There's a sense of terror that washes over you when you know that not even the gun on your hip will help with whatever the fuck is happening, and let me tell you, it's not a feeling I ever want to experience again. After taking a minute and choking on the smell, I finally managed to find the game trail I had taken in and forced myself to slowly walk it back out, not running, despite what the lizard part of my brain was screaming. It wasn't until I'd made it back out into a relatively open clearing that ran back to the main river that the smell finally went away. I took stock of myself, covered in cold sweat, piss still barely in my bladder, and thankfully clean underwear. Then I took a look back where I had come from. The only way I can describe it won't do it justice. This thing was easily 9 feet tall, gangly, and covered in rotting swamp vegetation, almost humanoid, but the proportions were all wrong, and stretched with absurdly long limbs and neck. And where the head should have been, there was a tangle of at least a dozen deer antler sheds. It was just tucked slightly behind a tree, staring at me with a gaze that oozed hatred, even though I couldn't see eyes of any kind. I know it's not much, but it's hard to describe a terrifying situation in detail when your main focus at the time was staying alive and keeping your shorts from overflowing with shit. Another one, in the vein of cryptos like things that Florida has, is the mimics. I've seen a lot of talk about skinwalkers and such on here, but as far as I know and have heard, there have been no verified skinwalker encounters this far south. A lot of creatures, or the things that they do, end up being labeled a skinwalker encounter on here, but I have a feeling that they are something entirely different. The mimics are one such thing. Simply put, they're unidentified voices in the woods. They can sound like a recording stuck on a loop, the same tone, inflection, and varying volumes on repeat, or they can sound like your voice repeating things back to you. I've only heard of one time that the voices ever seemed anything close to sentient, in the sense that they tried to from a sentence out of an abundance of voices it probably heard, and wasn't just a direct repeat of sent hit. Someone had said, they're known to try and lure people deep into the woods or into dangerous areas. For what? I have no clue, and as far as I know, no one has ever seen what makes the voices, or why they do it, past causing harm. I'm not saying that there's no person to ever see where the voices come from, but if they have, they never made it back to tell anyone. Another distinctly terrifying thing in Florida is the Everglades plane graveyards. There have been many a plane crash in the Glades, and while some of them are easily verified and explainable, there are more than a few that have gone unreported and unexplained. The phenomenon around the crashes that is really scary involves how these downed planes seem to pop up and then disappear throughout the Glades. You're always told never to use downed planes as landmarks when you're navigating the Glades due to how frequently they pop up and then disappear, and also seem to move of their own volition. I was once told by an old-timer that if I ever came across more than one downed plane in a half-mile area, to immediately turn around and not come back for a couple of weeks. The superstition is that the plane graveyards are a marker to an area that is a kind of soft spot between places in time and space. A spot where things go in, but never come back out. Or if they do, it's not the same as how they went, or when they went in. An old story passed around by guides is how a man was searching for a gator fishing area, only to stumble across one of these plane graveyards only to be warded off by another boat. After describing the boat and planes to an FWC officer due to how freaked out he was by the whole situation, he was informed that what he saw was impossible because the boat and man he was talking about were declared missing and legally dead over 20 years prior. Sorry for the delay. Back with more. Was talking with the other guide who was scouting spots with me yesterday, and he brought up a good one that you guys have mentioned here and there in this thread. Skunk apes. His only encounter with one was a doozy from the sounds of it. He heard reports of something tearing down stands and feeders on a hunting plot that he leased out with a few other guides, and no one could seem to figure out what was doing it. The rest of the guides were lazy and didn't spend as much time on the property as he did, and blamed it on local shitheads tearing up property for fun. Taking it upon himself, he decided to stake out the hunting plots for a weekend, spending a night at each of the 3 stands and seeing if he could spot who was destroying their plots. The first 2 nights were uneventful, but on the 3rd morning, he found that one of the stands he had staked out previously had been fucked with. One of the ladders that was lag-bolted to the tree had its bottom section ripped free and tossed a few dozen feet away into a small pile of brush, along with the feeder being tipped over. Deciding to take a chance, and assuming that someone was watching him cycle through the stands, he stayed in the same one he had the night before, hoping that they figured he'd moved on. Early the next morning, just before sunrise, he said that he got a whiff of something that he described as the worst mix of body odor and dank weed. Immediately assuming that a local homeless pothead was the one tearing up his stands, he scanned around with spotting monocular until he saw a flash of eye reflection. He said that his blood pretty much froze when he saw the animal eye reflection about 7 feet up in the air and peeking around the edge of a bunch of trees near the end of the shooting lane they had cut out. The one thing that he vividly remembers is how tall it was, how wide it was, and the fact that it made sure it made eye contact with him before sliding back into the trees. This is a guy who is trained to listen for and spot animals, and he said that thing was dead silent in its movements, and while it may have not been the 9-foot-tall Bigfoot described by most people up north, it was easily 7 foot tall and wider in the shoulders than any man he had met. Never mentioned anything about it being hairy or any fur color, and it's probably due to seeing it in the weird twilight that dawn brings, but he said that it definitely didn't have the silhouette of a normal person. The smell also faded quickly after he saw it slip back into the trees. He refuses to hunt there anymore, but he's never heard any more reports of it showing back up. The one thing that really freaked me out in his story was just how quiet this thing was. The fact that it could sneak up on him while being that big is more than concerning for me. Bears and the like make enough noise that you know they're coming, and panthers are about the only things that move silently enough to go undetected, and are relatively large. But this thing apparently didn't make a sound. Let's get out of the woods for a bit, though. I don't mind going back to them if you guys want more, but there's a whole lot more to talk about with the amount of water and coastlines we have. I've heard more than a few reports of ghost ships popping up and subsequently disappearing after not responding to hails, and being sighted offshore or popping up on radar, but not being there when a rescue ship finally makes it to the last known location. The only one I've personally happened upon in that vein, while maybe not overtly supernatural, was enough to make me ditch the boat after tossing in an perb for the CG to track down. We were running about 25 miles off the east coast chasing kingfish, when we heard a call go out across VHF Channel 16 for a boat in distress. We heard the initial hail for Mayday, but the person sending out the call was doing it to report an empty vessel floating away from a well-known spot for reef fishing. We were nearby. Some decided to swing by and see if there was still a need for help due to not seeing many people out on the water that day. I've seen boats drift off anchor while someone is diving and leave them stranded and other similar events, so we figured it wouldn't be something critical unless someone was injured and had fallen overboard. We hailed the person sending out the Mayday call for the other vessel, and they said that they were the only 2 vessels in the area, and he hadn't seen anyone in the water or bubbles rising like someone was down below scuba diving. Weird, but still nothing creepy. We managed to find the boat not far off the spot that the original call said it would be, and that's when everything started to look weird. First, the anchor was still securely stowed on the front of the boat, so there was no sign of it drifting off anchor or snapping an anchor line. What really set our hair on end was the signs that it had been adrift for a while. The bait on the deck was hard and crusty. The live well was off, and the fish still in it were obviously bloated and rotted from stewing in hot, stagnant salt water. And the key was in the on position, but it had no power across the console, and the motor obviously wasn't running. This thing had been left in the on and ready position when it had been abandoned, making us think we had a man overboard scenario that was a couple of days old at the least. Calling it in with the CG, we relayed the registration numbers to them and asked if they had any reports of it being missing. I swear the lady on the other end of line sounded like she was about to shit when she replied. The boat had been reported missing 2 weeks earlier in the Keys, and we found it just off the coast near Ponce Inlet, about 400 miles away up the coast. That part wasn't so weird. Due to the current flow up the coast, it was natural for it to head that way. What really set us off was the fact that it had disappeared on a sunny flat day, and we had a swell over 2 foot during the time it was missing. Short of these guys abandoning ship, there was no reason for the boat to be in pristine condition but unmanned. W had heard reports of pirates seizing boats and then tossing victims overboard after taking what they wanted. What they did next was really fucked up. They would call in the vessels across main radio channels, luring people like us out to them and then doing the same thing with our boat. It was about the time that we received the report back from the CG lady that it all clicked with us. We hadn't seen the other boat that had initially called it in, and we weren't sticking around to find out who it was. We popped a blinking EPIRB in that boat and hauled ass back to shore. We heard later that they had hauled the boat back in, but there were no signs of foul play and it was chalked up to freak accident of some kind. The 2 guys that had been in the boat were never found, and as far as I know, nothing was missing off of it, but it was enough to set our spook radar on high alert and get us to bug out.
Personal spook experiences, Greentext thread. I'll start. Florida, 2005. Am 14. Me and my family had moved to a new house in a rural neighborhood. Place was great. All of the neighbors were good people, the kind that would give you the clothes on their backs. They brought over some welcome gifts. Pretty standard stuff, homemade dishes and the like. After every one of them dropped off the stuff they had, I saw one of our neighbors, an older man around 50, with graying black hair and blue eyes, pull my dad aside to talk about something. Being the nosy little shit I was, I eavesdropped on the conversation. He started talking about how the area was nice and all that, but that stuff could get weird around here. Said that there were a lot of strange noises the other neighbors heard on the space behind our backyard. Apparently, the family to the left of us had seen something crawling over the privacy fence from our backyard about a month before we moved. Said they were grilling out back when they heard the fence rattling, like it was being grabbed and shaken. One of them went to investigate in case of squatters. A K.A. peek over fence. Old man gives the description the neighbor gave him. Amber-colored fur, around the size of a Dalmatian, but no tail. Dad chalks it up to some weird mutt living back there. Old man says to be careful, since there had been some stray dog sightings in the forest behind us. Afterwards, Dad asked me to go check out back to make sure that there isn't anything back there now. Open the gate and see an oval-shaped hole in the ground about 1 foot deep and 4 foot wide. There's a bunch of leaves and amber hair in the center, but it looks like it's been undisturbed for a while. No footprints in dirt or signs of life like prey remains or crap. Tell Dad. He says since it looked old, we probably didn't need to worry. Been living there about a week now. There were some weird howls in the woods behind our house. Doesn't sound like a dog or anything else I'd ever heard. Kind of like a chimp's yell and a hissing cat mixed together. Go to backyard to see if there was anything back there. See a 4 feet tall mass of fur sniffing around chicken coop. Its fur is the exact same color as what I found in the hole, just as shiny too. The air smelled like a mix of rotting fruit, raw meat, and stagnant water. I accidentally smack my elbow on the door frame and it perks its head up to look in my direction. Its face looks like a mix between an orangutan and a deer. Has weird droopy ears that look like if you tried to turn a human's ears into a rabbit's. Lets out a shrill screech that sounds kind of like a cat yowling. Climbs a tree in the corner of the backyard, hops over the fence and books it into the forest. Close back door as quietly as possible. Book it upstairs and wake my dad up. Tell him that there was a monster in the backyard. He assures that I was just seeing things wrong because it was so dark. He says that if we fill in the little nest hole, spray the yard with something, it probably won't come back. Next day, Dad wakes me up so I can help him fill in the nest hole. We finish filling in the hole, and my dad hands me a spray bottle full of some weed killer. He said if we masked its scent, it would be less likely to come back. Don't really know if there's any truth to that, but okay. Absolutely douse the perimeter of the fence in weed killer. Nothing happens for like 2 days. I'm at home alone because my parents had to rush to go see Uncle in hospital. Apparently he had a heart attack while working and was in the ECU. Before they leave, Dad gives me key to gun cabinet. Dad is kind of paranoid about someone possibly breaking in because we were new to the area, and although the neighbors were nice, he didn't want to take a chance. I've only shot a few times, but Dad taught me a lot. He says that if anything happens, to get the revolver in the bottom of the cabinet. I hug him and my mom and they leave. For most of the day, I kind of just laze about until around 7 p.m. when I hear something scratching against wood. Go to backyard, see the creature from a few nights ago trying to rip off the door to our chicken coop. I take a moment to soak in this thing's full appearance to be sure it's not a dog. It's on 2 legs, and I can see that it clearly has hands on its front limbs. They were beige and leathery looking, really bony and long too. Each finger had sharp little nails that were slightly curved upwards. If I had to guess, they were around an inch long. Its legs were very similar to a human's, but covered in fur and a lot slimmer. Its feet were about a foot long and arched like a person's as well, but they had the same nails as the hands, but larger. I close the door quietly enough to where it doesn't notice, as it's too preoccupied with acquiring KFC. Sneak upstairs and unlock gun cabinet, grab the revolver Dad told me to use and an entire 40-round box of .357 with it, load 6 rounds into the cylinder, rush back downstairs and open back door just as the ape thing rips the chicken coop door off its hinges. Fire off a round and plug it in the left ass cheek. Lets out one of the most blood-curdling screams I've ever had the displeasure of hearing. Still sounds like an ape and cat mixed together, but at max volume and 10 feet away. It grabs one of the hens from inside the coop and chucks it at me. Poor bird barely misses hitting me and splats against the wall next to me, covering the outside lamp in blood. It lowers itself to all fours and tries to rush me. Before it gets within 5 feet of me, I fire off 3 more rounds and miss 2 of them, but manage to peg it in the right arm. Arm starts bleeding like a faucet, and the thing looks like it's scared shitless. Hobbles away towards a tree and struggles to climb it in an attempt to escape. It's smearing blood all over the tree trunk, and it starts to make a hooting noise. Hear rustling in the woods as I try to reload the revolver. Another one scrambles out of the woods behind the house. New ape creature is grabbing the injured one and trying to drag it away from the yard. I finish reloading the revolver and fire all 6 rounds in quick succession. Hit the already injured one in the gut and get the new one in the hand and leg. Miss other 3 shots. Reloading again, but they get away. Doubt the first one survived, but the second one would probably be okay. I slump down after the adrenaline from the encounter wears off. I'm breathing roughly, and my heart feels like it's going to burst out of my chest. Hear neighbor's door open. They climb the fence to see what all the commotion is. They check me over to make sure I'm okay. Neighbor family's mom stays with me for a moment until old man neighbor comes through backyard gate. Asks me to tell him what happened. I explain, and he tells me that although those things sound like something from a myth, he's seen his fair share of weird stuff. He asks me if we have a house phone, and I tell him yes, and he asks me if I know either of my parents' phone numbers. Gave him the number to my dad's shitty Motorola flip phone. He calls my dad a half-true explanation of what happened. Tells my dad that there was a black bear in the backyard, and it broke into the coop, but that I shot it, and it ran away. Dad says he'll be on his way to come pick me up. Ask old neighbor bro why he didn't tell the whole truth. Says that not everybody is keen to believe in that sort of stuff, and he doesn't want either of us to be seen nutty. Old guy makes me something to eat at his house while we wait for my dad. Starts telling me about how there's a lot of strange things in the world. Says that those things will probably leave us alone now since they've been hurt so badly. Tells me to be careful from now on, and that if something happened while my parents were away to come to him. Here honking outside, Dad pulls up into old guy's driveway and comes and asks me if I'm okay. Tell him I'm fine and that I'd rather him stay home since I didn't feel safe alone after that. He says okay, and we go back to our house and check on birds. All are okay except for the one the ape thing used as a softball. Me and Dad put door back on hinge and go to sleep. Didn't see the ape things again, but I could hear them yelling in the forest every once in a while. I would also find rotten fruit and small dead animals thrown over the fence all the time. I haven't seen them, but they're there for sure. That's it for that story, though.